Imagine one of the most famous streets in America, but without cars. Well, I'm gonna do more than imagine it. I'm gonna share some data that supports that vision, and I'm gonna show you that in some ways it's already a reality. We're gonna take a trip down a car-free Las Vegas Boulevard coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, always welcome, and here's one that came in from viewer Ryan Ayers. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on how a place like Vegas/Paradise would wean itself off of the kind of egregious car-oriented places like Las Vegas Boulevard at Tropicana, and what the end result of that process might look like for cars, pedestrians, and other modes of transit. Okay, yeah, I have to agree. The very design of something like Las Vegas Boulevard and Tropicana, with its enormous number of approach lanes and pedestrian bridges which are not super convenient for pedestrians but do get them off the street in the name of efficient traffic operations, is kind of hostile. But there's also a supreme irony here, which is that despite the absolutely car-centric design of the roadway itself, the Strip is a very people-oriented place. It wasn't always like this. You see, in one sense, Las Vegas Boulevard is the archetypal stroad. Like a lot of stroads, it's a legacy state highway that was the main route for through traffic before a parallel freeway went in this case, Interstate 15. Las Vegas Boulevard was originally designated US 91. And for a long time, 91 was the main highway between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. And the resorts that cropped up on what we now call the Strip were very car-oriented, with surface parking fronting the casinos. A couple are still designed that way. Anyway, for much of the Strip's early history, you were not meant to walk at all. The Strip is still not without problems. Important to note, this whole area that you likely think of as Las Vegas is not actually in Las Vegas. It's really in unincorporated Clark County, south of the city limits. And what you would find if you lived here is that the city of Las Vegas has somewhat more progressive ideas about street design and how to prioritize or not prioritize cars than Clark County does. So let's come back to the present. In another video, I talked about how Americans in their choice of vacation destinations will absolutely flock to places that simulate a walkable urban environment, even if, or maybe because, they don't embrace that kind of existence in their daily lives. And I would propose to you that the Vegas Strip is another one of these places people come from all over to experience a place where they can walk everywhere. Yeah, Las Vegas Boulevard still has some stroady characteristics, but a lot of the walking environment is pretty well designed and interfaces nicely with the destinations people are going to. And people do walk here. The share of people who walk as a major part of their transportation while visiting the Strip is something over 50%. And you can understand it. Why would you line up for a taxi to go to a property that's like right next door or across the street? Well, to be fair, the resorts are enormous, so the distance from one to another is deceptively long. And a lot of the people who visit here are just not used to walking or maybe not dressed for it. And I discovered something very funny recently. They actually have vending machines that sell cheap walking shoes for people who did not come equipped with practical footwear. Look, all I'm saying here is, as much of a car sewer as the Strip is, walking is often the most convenient and maybe even enjoyable way to get from one place to another. And new resorts keep getting built, which means more foot traffic, and from a certain twisted perspective, that actually is a problem. Here's what I mean. I've talked about all the pedestrian bridges they have up and down the Strip, but there are still a lot of locations where they have at-grade crossings. Here's one of my absolute favorites, and yeah, I'm being sarcastic. It's this crossing where you've got the Paris and the Planet Hollywood on one side, and the Bellagio and the Cosmopolitan on the other. I actually had to go out and film this because it's such a disaster. So here's this pork chop on the west side of the crosswalk. If you want to cross Las Vegas Boulevard, you have to crowd onto it, and at busy times, there just isn't enough room. People just accumulate and spill over until the walk signal finally comes. The pork chop is so small that it can't discharge people fast enough to saturate the crosswalk sufficiently. So if you're at the back of the queue, you have no chance of even entering the crosswalk before the don't walk starts flashing. It's just brilliant stuff. This is Vegas though, and there's power in numbers, so people just keep crossing until the pork chop is empty, regardless of the signal. This kind of dynamic happens up and down the strip, and it's not that I particularly care if motor vehicle traffic gets inconvenienced by too many people walking. It's just that I am a fan of things that operate correctly, and the Las Vegas Strip just does not. So clearly, being out on the street, walking from outlandish destination to outlandish destination is just part of the Vegas experience. It's what people come here for, so I guess my thought is, why not just get rid of the cars? Look, I'm not an urban designer. I don't have any fancy renderings that are gonna illustrate for you what all the possibilities are for a right-of-way that's like 160 feet wide and 4 miles long. I'm just a guy who sits around all day, street viewing cool cities and daydreaming and making marginally watchable YouTube videos. And one thing I like to do is street view places I've been to see if they've changed at all. Which brings me to Avenue Stalingrad in Brussels, where I did stay in 2017, and it looked like this, with a bunch of street parking and dead space down the middle. But when I move up to 2021, it looks like this. Now, I have all kinds of thoughts on the things cities are doing with repurposed shipping containers, but this does strike me as an improved use of space and a more people-friendly street. I'm just going to point out that Las Vegas Boulevard is twice as wide as Avenue Stalingrad. Draw your own conclusions. So before I get too far into fantasy land, let's address the obvious criticism, which is, if you close Las Vegas Boulevard to cars, where will all the traffic go? Well, here are some things I've learned about driving on the Strip since I moved here a year ago. First of all, locals don't drive on the Strip. They know it's the least efficient way to get anywhere, and they know all the shortcuts and back streets. Second, if you take a taxi or a ride hail to or from somewhere on the Strip, your driver is probably going to use a back way to get you there too. So given all that, just where is all the traffic on the Strip coming from? Well, some of it is vehicles that seem to be serving no other purpose than driving back and forth, advertising shows and attractions. But also, let's talk about the different ways visitors get to their hotels. First of all, about half of people visiting Vegas come by plane. So let's talk about the airport first. It's one of the busiest in the country, and it has a transit mode share of maybe 1% on a good day. That means almost everyone is taking a taxi or a limo or a ride hail, or they're renting a car. And a full 80% of visitors coming in through the airport are either traveling to a resort on the Strip or downtown. Let me put this another way. Around 50,000 visitors show up at the airport every day, and they get in individual motor vehicles that are bound for destinations that exist within a narrow corridor that starts at the airport and stretches about 6 miles north. I'm not going to rehash my thoughts on this, which I have shared in other videos, but I would suggest that there are more efficient ways to move thousands of people in a straight line. I actually talked to Reese from RM Transit before I shot this. I think he has a video coming out that covers a lot of this, and I know his takes are solid, so be sure to watch it. Let's talk about how the other half of the visitors get here. They drive, and around 75% of the visitors who arrive by car, that's close to 20 million a year, come up I-15 from Southern California. So they bring their cars, and then they proceed to clog the Strip with them. And something on the order of 50,000 people a day moving in a straight line, all bound for basically the same destination. This is another one where I'm pretty sure there's another technology available that's far more efficient and doesn't result in a bunch of tourists turning what should be one of America's marquee people places into just another traffic sewer. Maybe the biggest sticking point to making all this work is just access to the resorts. I already mentioned that there's a back way to get into the taxi drop-off areas and the parking garages for pretty much every resort. But a lot of them have access from the Strip too. Again, all accessible from side streets and back streets, but if there's one thing that's evergreen in transportation planning, it's that business owners will fight any attempt to reduce their access tooth and nail. These places are basically the economic engine of Southern Nevada, so if they perceive something is not going to be in their interest, then it's probably not going to happen. So I just suggest that making minor adjustments to vehicular access configurations might be worth the trade-off for transforming the Las Vegas Boulevard right-of-way into the most incredible linear park / shipping container visitor attraction on the face of the earth. Okay, in a minute I'm going to talk about why the idea of a car-free Vegas Strip isn't quite as outlandish as you might think, and I'll share some closing thoughts on Vegas as well. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to drop a like on the video. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Lots of ways to stay connected, and supporting the channel via Patreon is always super appreciated. So here's the thing. We already know a car-free Vegas Strip is viable, and we know people love it. They actually closed the Strip to vehicular traffic on what's practically the busiest night of the year, New Year's Eve. They did a partial closure when they held the NFL draft here last year. And they're gonna close it again later this year when Vegas hosts its first race on the F1 circuit. And you know another time when you shut down your city's main street? It's when a local team wins a championship, which happened last year. The Las Vegas Aces of the WNBA actually became the first professional team from Vegas to win a championship. Well, I'm sort of a hoopaholic and I love car-free streets, so I absolutely had to go down to the Strip and check out the victory parade. They'd closed down just the southbound lanes for the parade, but later on they ended up shutting the whole thing down and running the parade north. I got there early and you could really feel the energy build as the crowd started gathering. Any other day, people, mostly tourists, are gathered in this spot to watch the Bellagio fountain show. But on this day, people, mostly locals, were gathered to celebrate their team, their city, and just each other. It was just excellent vibes. And when the parade started rolling through, well, it was just a really genuinely joyful experience, and not just because people were celebrating a team that really made the city proud, but you could also feel just the latent hunger people have to gather in what's probably Vegas's most iconic spot these days and make it their own. Literally right on the Strip, in front of the Bellagio fountains, the fake Eiffel Tower soaring above. So making the Strip car-free, not only can we do it, we already are doing it, and when we do, it is the Strip at its best, just a pure people place. All I'm saying is, why would you not want that all the time? And that is all I've got today. Thanks for joining, and thanks as always to the patrons who, well, let's just say ad revenue from YouTube is very unpredictable, and the consistency of what comes from Patreon supporters just makes a huge difference in the viability of this channel. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode from a very different location next week, and I'll see you then.